Well, hello again and welcome to another edition of Addiction. Got a minute? It's January 25th, 2019, dead winter on the island of Martha's Vineyard, and finally it's getting appropriately cold for the season. Lots of things have been going on. First, I want to thank you all very much for your comments and suggestions. It's been really tremendous. I've truly appreciated the fact that some of you have been very constructive with how we look, what we say, how we say it. So thank you very much, and please keep those cards and letters coming. I'm joined with my esteemed co-host, Michael Blanchard.
Hi,
Howdy,
Howie.
bud.
How are you? Doing good.
I'm bringing to the party this morning Dr. Charles Silberstein. Good morning.
Hi.
Thank you very much for
being
coming.
here with us.
Thank you
We're
for
really
having me,
excited.
Howie and Michael.
Oh.
I've known Dr. Silberstein well over 10 years now, and we've worked together in a number of capacities. He's worked through and with the Martha's Vineyard Community Services, which has been just spectacular, your work there, and truly appreciate it. I mean,
Thank
it's
you.
really been a big deal. I was associated with the Community Services long enough to see the transition of different individuals and hearing their effectiveness and the way that they're appreciated. So I just want to back that up and say thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Your work at the hospital. I worked at the hospital for a while as well with Dr. Silberstein. So he's associated with the Martha's Vineyard Regional Hospital. And so it's wonderful. It's great to have you aboard.
Can I say one thing? So I know we're probably not going to talk about this as our prime focus, but I want to thank you for the effort that you've made on the Substance Use Coalition. I'm not sure, we need a show on that. We'll bring you back,
Yeah,
okay? Because I think there's a whole group of people, police departments, school systems, community services, a whole bunch of people that meet on a regular basis to try to come up with strategies on changing the way that we view substance use on the island.
Public health campaign
Yep.
for the Vineyard.
And you're a
Yep.
busy guy, and you show up at every meeting. You've taken on the chairmanship portion, and I just think we really appreciate the leadership you're showing.
Well, all this
So-
appreciation
I
is
know.
is
Well,
big
it's so
time
happy to have you here.
Reward.
So anyway,
That's it. Well, thank you very much
Yeah,
for
we've
coming.
had enough
Charlie.
of you for today.
First of all, not only do I appreciate that you are here, and let's talk more about the committee and its impact on the island. What's the first thing that comes to mind as far as what the Substance Use Coalition is able to do?
Yeah, well, I chair a small subgroup, and when I say I chair, it's because we needed someone to chair it, and I stepped up, but really it's a group of people who are working together as equals, and our vision is to create a public health campaign on Martha's Vineyard that will change attitudes about use of substances. You know, we have a very permissive culture here, as do many resort communities. And in a study that we did in 2004, we had excess drinking by CDC standards that among about 30% of our population, of our year-round population, about 20% of the part-time population, about half as much nationally. So we have big problems here, and the thinking behind the public health campaign is that if we can market cigarettes and alcohol and marijuana now to people, we can also market healthy behaviors. And there is a marketing company, actually a nonprofit called the Public Goods Project, which we're partnering with, which we hope to bring to the Vineyard to use a variety of tools in order to influence youth and community attitudes toward weed and alcohol and other drugs.
Brilliant. And I do hope that I will be able to make the time to participate and pull my weight with the coalition as well. The philosophy has always been for me to inspire communication, to lower the hurdles of families talking to each other. And this will absolutely be one of them. I mean, with the advent of marijuana being legal, and now when you're sitting on circuit having an ice cream cone, a car goes by and there's this big whiff of pot smoke comes out of the car, and you got your kids sitting left and right, a conversation should be had. And so things like this are critically important.
I just want to say a conversation especially should be had if you have any family history of addiction or alcoholism, because if you combine all the factors other than genetics that contribute to whether someone is going to become a substance user, they don't equal the genetic component. over 50% of what contributes to someone becoming an addict is just genetics. It is an illness above everything else.
The point of genetics, environment, situation, culture, there's so many elements that are involved. It's just one of the things those of us that work in the field have to take a very good look at, because you are absolutely right. If you're predisposed because of your genetics, it's going to be one hell of a challenge, versus if it doesn't run in your family and just because of situation, environment, and friends, you're more conducive. It's more go ahead.
It's like with opiate addiction. Why is it that some people can use opiates? Most people can use opiates and never become addicted to them.
Most people can use opiates and not get addicted. Absolutely. It's startling when you realize the reality that the fear of instantly getting addicted has been put into our culture. But the reality is you can address this, you can pull them out of the cycle of it, and can be very successful because of that.
You know, in Vietnam, most people used opiates regularly, and most of those people used them every day. A year after they got back to the States, only 1% of people were using. And it's one of the things that's so frustrating as an addiction psychiatrist, is that people have the idea, well, I stopped cigarettes and that was really hard. Why can't you stop opiates? Yeah. You know, I stopped drinking alcohol, or I stopped using opiates. Why can't you? And the reality is that this is a different disease in each person, and it's a particularly powerful disease in people who have a genetic vulnerability to addiction.
It's particularly different for each person, and that is the takeaway, that you have to deal with each person based on their cards in their hand. You can't throw a template at them. In treatment, you can't throw a template. In rehab, other than the physical component of the time it takes to get the chemical out of your system, sure, all right, that's known. It's a medical fact. It takes a few days or whatever the treatment is. But then post-treatment, the aftercare, and you hear me harping about this all the time, the critical importance of aftercare. You know, clearly, when you are out of your environment, then you go right back into the tar pit with all the triggers, it's going to be a horrible time keeping your head above water. But if you've got systems, if you're involved in a group, if you have personal one-on-one counseling, if you've got a recovery coach, people you can turn to when these urges come over, then the odds of maintaining your sobriety are critical. And then for how long? How long do you think somebody needs generally? And here we go. We went from specifics to general.
And the fact is, it's a spectrum. It varies from individual to individual.
Boom, thank you.
Some people will stop and never use again, though I don't think there's anyone who doesn't think about it. But the majority of people will have relapses, and you know, as the three of us all know, and probably most of the audience, I hope, addiction is a chronic relapsing illness like diabetes or hypertension. And if your goal is that someone's going to get the treatment and they're never going to use again, generally it fails, right? Mm-hmm. And if your goal is that there are going to be fewer relapses over time, that there's going to be more time between relapses, that the relapses will be less intense, then that's success.
Yeah, and I also, like next Friday I'm heading back to Atlanta, to Talbot Recovery Campus, where I went to rehab 8 years ago. It's a revisit, and I have a chance to speak with some of the residents that are there, do an AA meeting style thing. Even with, in going back to the disease, I just want to really emphasize what you just said about the genetic piece. You said it with such confidence. There's two pieces to that. One, that, and at Talbot they recognize the same thing when they would bring the families down, is that by instilling the disease model, you take it away from character defect to a lesser degree, and you move it towards disease. And there's two pieces to that. One is that if I know that I have a disease, I'm more likely to ask for help. If I think I'm a loser, I'm not going to ask for help. So you help the addicts by saying, okay, you got a disease, you can ask for help, it's okay. It's like if you had cancer, you would go to a cancer specialist. Now I'm going to go do something to address my disease, and I'm not going to knock myself down because of it. Right?
And I hear critics say of that kind of statement, I hear them say, you know, if you call it a disease, it takes the responsibility off the individual. And when I hear that, I know that those people really don't understand addiction. Yes, that's true with almost every
disease, right?
With every
You can-
disease.
yeah,
With
diabetes, you can keep eating cake if
That's
you want,
right.
I mean, so,
Hypertension.
Yeah.
If you lose weight, stop smoking cigarettes, avoid salt, sugar, and simple carbohydrates, your blood pressure will come down.
Yeah. But how many people do that, and hopefully the
Right.
pill will take care of it, right? So
it's what Howie was
yeah.
referring to, that we need a multimodal approach.
Yeah, and I think part of that is on the genetic side is trying to, if it was 100%, it would be easier for people to fathom. But it does help create a relapse situation, and even at Talbot, that had mainly physicians and airline pilots because it was a higher end rehab, 70% of the people eventually relapse that come out of that program. And the ones who don't relapse or relapse the least are physicians, because those physicians are on a mandatory monitoring program. And that goes back to the psychology piece of it, where you have to put yourself in a position where you're less likely to relapse. And one of those things could be setting yourself up for voluntary monitoring or mandated monitoring. So any day you wake up, you could have to go in and pee in a cup. And then your license and your life ends if there's alcohol or the drug in that situation. But when I got out of rehab, one of the things I wanted to do to prove to everybody, because I was arrested 3 times for drunk driving, I wanted to show them that I was real. So I actually signed up for a voluntary program that was available nationally. And it cost me a lot of money. But if anybody came to me and said, we don't know if you're for real, I wanted to be able to pull and have them call this company and be able to pull the test results and show that I'm still not drinking, because you have to build that trust back in people, right? So I didn't mean to digress, but I just wanted to,
I had a mentor, Mark Gallanter, who is a world-class addiction psychiatrist and started training programs for addiction psychiatrists. And he writes about something he coined as the 3 C's, which are the 3 legs of the stool of working with addiction. And the 3 C's are connection, coercion, and cognition. And coercion is a really useful tool. Yeah. It's why physicians are least likely to relapse, because if they do, there are real serious consequences. They lose their license and their livelihood. Yeah. And cognition is thinking about the reasons to stay clean, and that helps. It's not enough. And connection is what we get by going to 12-step meetings, or by having a sense of connection with friends who are sober, and having your family back. But it's not enough. Any one of those things.
No, it's a three-legged stool easily.
Any one of those things, but you need to get those things. You need to get invested in it.
Right.
And the success stories, which will be in the latter half of the show, called Interventionists with Patty Pike, we will be talking with people in the industry that are boots on the ground, doing the interventions themselves, the clinicians that are dealing with the aftermath of the effects of the addiction, both in hospital settings and in individual. One of the things here on the Vineyard that we're doing, we have the recovery coaching program. The multiple pathways to recovery is the mantra to the recovery coaching program, meaning that there are so very many ways to get back to sanity, to get back to a way of thinking which is healthy. And these can be any number of the organizations that you've heard of before, or clubs or groups, including things very familiar but not often associated with addiction, yoga, for example, things like this. But we are exploring all of them, because any of them could work for anyone at any particular time. So that's critically important. I do want to touch on one critical issue which has been brought up over and over again, and that's the buprenorphine issue. I'm going to say that it's been remarkable. In my experience, watching people begin to live healthy lives, sane lives, get their families intact, get their businesses back into order, and be able to live truly remarkable, healthy lives. The question of how long they should be engaged and what is an ongoing discussion. But Dr. Silberstein was remarkably involved with the the Vineyard House here on Martha's Vineyard. You were part of that how did it get going, and how's it going now?
Well, I co-founded Vineyard House in 1995 when I got here with Hazel Teagan. And
Hi, Hazel. Big nod.
Hazel makes anybody's face beam because she is such a saint.
In my early
So
days at the hospital, I'd sit next to Hazel for hours,
it's
night after night.
always comforting to sit next to Hazel.
Wonderful.
So I got to the Vineyard in '95, and actually before I got here, I started writing about the vision of creating a recovery center on the Vineyard. I think I called it a rural recovery center for Martha's Vineyard. And at that time, I was running a therapeutic community, a program where people would come and live in a recovery center for 6 months to 18 months. It was, we treated homeless, mentally ill addicts. And, I say that people's faces become grim, but the fact is that if you take somebody who's homeless, mentally ill, and addicted, you don't have to do much for them to dramatically change their lives. Give them a roof over their heads, their life has changed. Treat their medical problems, their life has changed. So the idea of community as method, using community as a healing tool, is in my genetics. That's a longer story why I say that, but it's deeply embedded in what I believe in and feel passionate about. So at the time we had an active detox at the hospital, and the problem was there's no place for people to go after they left. And we had the vision of buying a house next to the hospital and creating some kind of recovery community. And the idea is that they could go back and forth from the detox into the houses. And through a long story, which I won't go into today, we bought the first house, and then a second house, and then a third house for women, and then we moved to another campus. And it's a beautiful campus, and it's a perfect place for recovery, but the vision is a kind of self-help rehab. And a rehab in most of the country costs $500 to $1,000 or more a day. It can be much more. I had a patient who was in a place that was $100,000 a month. Do you know what Vineyard House costs for a month?
No idea.
It's, last I heard, I might be getting the number slightly off, $640 a month.
What?
Yeah.
$640 a month.
Beautiful
Now, we
facility.
do some beautiful facility. We do some fundraising. It is inexpensive because it's not a professional model. We use other resources in the community. One of the prerequisites for being in there is that you have to be willing to work every day and go to 12-step meetings. And that's the core of recovery. And while I'm no longer on the board, I'm still on the board of advisors and on the clinical committee.
And
At least
brought-
nominally,
yeah.
I don't make it there very
Well,
often.
and I want to bring up something, medication-assisted treatment, and then the Vineyard House and so on. I ran into, we're going to have somebody that comes here and is going to talk about rehabs that are pure towards 12-step and no medication. And then there are other facilities that look at medication as being an assisted part of it. I failed at a non-medication facility. Maybe it wasn't just all because of that. I mean, I might not have been ready for rehab, for recovery, but there's also that opportunity to go to a place that as a physician where you might be able to get, antidepressants, or whether it be Suboxone. I just want to get a quick
I believe
thought on that.
at this point in Massachusetts that you can't be an organization that has state funding and not allow
Offer-
medication-assisted
got it. Okay.
treatment. Vineyard House isn't state funded, and
okay.
I was the author of the medication policy, and our feeling was at the time that you can't have a person in bed 1 who's recovering from opiate addiction and someone in bed 2 with a bottle of OxyContin as they recover from surgery.
Yeah,
And so we'd say, look, you can't be here during a recovery period. You can come back when you're off of those medications. We don't permit people who have ADD and are on stimulants
Yeah.
for the same reason, beside the fact that our hope is, and it should be all of our hopes, that you do as little with medication as is safe.
Yeah.
And we don't permit people on benzodiazepines. They have to get off benzodiazepines like Valium, Xanax, Librium before they come in.
Easily shared, easily stolen, easily anything, right? You don't want to put that temptation in front of somebody who's just trying to get clean.
So Vineyard House will let people come in who are on Vivitrol. Vivitrol is a shot that you get once a month. It's an opiate blocker, and basically, if you're on Vivitrol, you can't get high from opiates. So, you know, there are all kinds of medication assistance that are available to people at Vineyard House, but not controlled substances. And I've advocated for years to look at the possibility of allowing buprenorphine or Suboxone in the house, somehow dispensing it outside of the house. But I never figured out how that could work until recently. But you have to have somebody dispensing it outside of the house. And people cheek it, and then people bring it into the house, and it's a messy possibility, though I wanted to look at that because the fact is that Suboxone or buprenorphine is the most effective treatment for opiate addiction. For people who are severe opiate addicts, there are people who will never be able to stop using opiates, and most people who are severe addicts will have relapses. And relapses are often lethal, as we've just seen twice in the last 6 weeks on Martha's Vineyard. So now there is a new form of buprenorphine where you get a shot once a month, and it lasts much longer than a month. And buprenorphine is slowly released. What buprenorphine it is an opiate, but it also is what we call a mixed opiate agonist and antagonist. So that at higher doses, you don't get more high for the vast majority of people. And buprenorphine doesn't tend to make people feel euphoric the way opiates do, and we can get into the chemistry of that if you want. But basically, people who are on buprenorphine are living normal lives. I could be on buprenorphine right now, and you would have no idea that I'm on an opioid. Different than heroin, different than virtually every other substance. I mean, if I were on weed, if I were on alcohol, if I were on cocaine.
You always have that mental, the impairment or whatever, or euphoria.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then if you take another opiate on top of the buprenorphine, it does nothing because it binds so strongly to the opiate receptor.
So this injectable form would be hope for someone like in a Vineyard House situation where you're not worried about a hidden pill on the side of your cheek or whatever coming back to be used for somebody else, that you'd have that month gateway.
And that person is not thinking, how am I going to get my buprenorphine today? What if the pharmacy is closed? What if
it's really cool.
It's very exciting. And you know, I'm engaged with Vineyard House, and I'm encouraging it all the time. There are people who will say, a drug is a drug is a drug, and you can't be on a drug. Well, that was what people said about Prozac 20 years ago, you know, and now there's no question that Vineyard House accepts people on antidepressants. And it's just, that's, for someone who's severely depressed, they need antidepressants. Otherwise, they live a miserable life and often commit suicide. And, you know, the same is true of opiate addicts. Some people will need to be on opiate maintenance for life. And for the majority, it blocks the ability to get high and allows them to live normal lives. I see countless people who were down and out, didn't have a job, didn't have a home, didn't have a family, and now on Suboxone, work, have families, have homes. It's very moving and live healthy lives.
Now, we're coming to about the end of our allotted time, and this subject is just loaded with discussion points. On the extremely positive side, everything Dr. Silberstein said happens to be accurate. It really is being represented that way. This product is really fascinating. The injectable Vivitrol and buprenorphine, the release over time removes a lot of the loose wheel component to derailing from your trip back to sanity or sobriety. So let's continue that discussion.
Yeah, we
I
need
actually
you back.
have
we can talk about the see, I'm a chemist, you know.
Well, we will talk about that. I'm putting a link to the Vivitrol product on the Facebook page and on my website. Produced by a good friend of mine, by the way. So that'll be available. And the conversation with Dr. Charlie Silberstein will continue. How can people get in touch with you, Doctor?
Email me, csilbersteinmd@gmail.com. Silberstein is with a B, Silberstein, or call me at my office is at the hospital. My number is 508-696-1990. But email is the best way. I just have to say one more thing, Howie, and that is every time there's a death in the vineyard, and there have been years when it's been once a month, I think if that person had been on buprenorphine at that time, they would not be dead now.
Yeah, and we had that this week. Very sad.
Yeah.
Yep.
Unfortunately, we have to end on that note. Thank you, Dr. Silberstein.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Howie.
It was great.
Patty's tied up doing intervention training in Calgary, Alberta today. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to make the show, but we'll look forward to contributions from her in the future, where we will be talking about interventionists, interventions, and best practices. Until then. If we all drip one drop of sanity back into the bucket of our society, we just might end up filling the pool enough to give the next generation a little safer world. I wish you calm seas and smooth sailing.